business on an urgent basis, and so it's part of the job, And so it was an experience. I won't say it was difficult. I would say that it was challenging. That's the word. Not difficult, but challenging, because you had to come up with decisions to be able to move the country forward. And every day you're asking yourself, is this the right decision for the people of Anguilla? How are we going to ensure that the people of Anguilla make it through? Remember Hurricane Irma, and that again. And Neil, I have to say that you really came to the forefront in the health field after Hurricane Irma. And I saw in the newspaper today the amount of money that the hospital, $12 million in improvements that they were talking about. I think the newspaper came out last week, Thursday. And that is a hefty amount of investment that went into the hospital. So we'll talk about that.
Oh, definitely, we'll talk about it. We'll have a special program for that. And of course, we'll also have a special hour for education with the work that you've been doing in the education field in terms of the projects and so on and so forth. But you mentioned, the sort of difficulties that any administration really and truly would have had. Our administration would have been privy to a lot of what is taking place now, and a continuation would have given us an opportunity, to use our experiences and so on and so forth. So I don't know what the correct word is there, whether empathize or sympathize with the present administration.
Probably
but
both.
I want to say this though, that it would be remiss if the present administration, if they do not prepare the people, the electorate, for what is to come. Because there is one thing in terms of the campaign, the platform, rhetoric, and the reality. I would have outlined this on a number of occasions during the campaigning, because I can go back and give an example whereby in 2010, between 2010 and 2015, with the implementation of the ISL, for example, and on our platform between 2010 2015, the pledges were made from the platform, by a number of us who are there, that it will be removed. Again, platform rhetoric, as opposed to the reality when you hit government offices. And this government, the present administration, would have made a number of what I call platform promises and rhetoric and so on. And we'll point them out as we go along, because this is basically the facts, So we've got to prepare our people for this sort of thing. And at the end of the day, as I mentioned a little early on, I was fortunate when I came into won a seat and got in politics and got a ministry and so on, that I had the likes of and the experiences of Osborne and Victor and those folks and so on and so forth. So I imagine what these folks are going through, having nobody to really look around and so on. And even you mentioned the banking resolution. Folks would have remembered when there were all sorts of I call it opposition, public protests at the House of Assembly and so on. And as a young parliamentarian and minister of government at that time, I'm sure it would have been uncomfortable for you.
Definitely.
Of course, I was involved in those sort of things before, with the physical planning bill and the labor code and so on and so forth. And even then, with that experience, I mean, the former premier, really and truly, with his leadership style and the way how he handled that, was something that we had to deal with.
I can certainly remember in the back of the House of Assembly, after we had the doors broken down and we took a break and we went to the back, and we had a big old discussion. That's one of the things I think that the average person may not appreciate or may not understand about the what happens behind the scenes, because not everybody is on the same page all the time. We all have different views. We all have. It's all like you're in a marriage where it's not just one person. It was 4, now it's 6, 7, and so everybody at the end of the day is going to have a different opinion. But you have to come to a consensus in terms of being able to move forward. And the decision of Mr. Banks at the time was to heed the concerns of the younger parliamentarians in terms of putting the banking resolution on hold for a week. And then we did the island-wide consultation to make sure that people understood why we were doing the banking resolution and the options that were available. And so coming out of that, I recall when we came back the following week, we were able to get through because by that time people had understood what exactly the situation was. And so today, just the other day in the House of Assembly, you commended the Premier for recognizing the importance of the NCBA Bank. I think we had to approve an overdraft facility, yes? And so with the NCBA Bank, and so what that says is that we do recognize the importance, and we do understand why our administration had to take the difficult decision to keep or preserve an indigenous bank for us here in Anguilla.
Yeah, you mentioned too that at the end of the day we all don't agree, and this is something that, again, as I mentioned in the opening, right? This will be educational and will be informative, because for some reason, the electorate and people in general will think that you're going to executive council, you're going to cabinet meetings, and all are on the same page. Yeah. I know if anything unfortunate, so to speak, would have been bestowed on us during our times, everybody would say it's Victor's fault. Everybody think that Victor is the one that makes whatever decisions, and a lot of times, decisions that are made in government, we all don't agree on it. Sometimes Victor doesn't agree on it. I mean, and as this program goes on, then I will share some of my experiences. This is just our opening. I will share some of my experiences in situations where, as part of a government, I wasn't in favor of what took place, but at the end of the day, we were part of a government, and this is one of the things that, good leadership and good governance and so on and so forth, we'll have to look at.
Neil, you made mention of health, that you hope that discussions that they're preparing the people. You being the former Minister of Health, and you understanding why we had to close our borders from March of 2020, and now sitting on the outside looking in, and the decision to open the country on the 1st of November, even on a small scale, etc. What advice would you give for us, the average person? We've been living COVID-free for all intents and purposes since April of this year, and so when we look at TV, the television, we see all of these other countries and everyone else in the world wearing masks and social distancing, and some are going back into restrictions. And we are now embarking on reopening the country. What is it that you think that you would say to encourage us to be prepared as to what we anticipate would be forthcoming?
Yeah, we have been fortunate, and thank God we have been. There isn't any one individual, a group of individuals, so to speak, that could take full credit for it. It was a collective effort moving forward. But basically, your government would be like in a catch-22, so to speak. At the end of the day, while we're enjoying being COVID-free, how will we survive beyond that? Yes. I have gone on record in the House of Assembly and other places and saying not if we get any more COVID cases, but when we get them. We'll have to be prepared for them. Of course, it's not rocket science, so to speak, and I know that the public in general, they are uneasy, they are uncomfortable. Some of it rightfully so in terms of the information that is out there. But what I would say to the government is that, and you have a pretty good health team that is there. I guess it probably will be politically correct to say you'll have to follow the sciences, even though some leaders worldwide think that the scientists don't know what they're talking about. But we must be able to identify, isolate, and then treat. We wouldn't want community spread and so on and so forth to take place. It's going to be tough because it's a very delicate balance we've got to deal with. And it's going to take all of us to be able to contribute to not only to keep Anguilla COVID-free, but to manage it. Because remember, we had 3 cases.
Yes.
Okay? And we were able to identify, test, to manage, isolate, and so on and so forth. Now, in terms of the challenge for the government in moving forward in opening the borders and so on, they have to put, well, of course, the protocols that are there, but they have to put things in place, whereby, you could isolate them and so on. We have limited capacity in terms of, for instance, the isolation unit that we have there are 10 beds, and if you get 15 patients that you'll have to isolate, and there's a ripple effect in terms of cost, because one has to be very, very, very careful with our limited capacity in terms of staffing, because if and when we do get a case, the exposure of that positive case to our healthcare professionals, those healthcare professionals will have to be taken out of the system and isolated as well.
Yeah.
So it is one of the things that kept me nervous for quite a while I was in administration, and continues to keep me nervous because I know what the situation is all about. But it's a delicate balance of opening and being exposed and staying closed and being COVID free.
Right.
So
no easy answers.
There are no easy answers. But what I would say, like I said early on, the government, the Minister of Health and the Health Authority, they have to come together, and we need to understand a little bit. There are a lot of work that needs to be done. A lot of folks who are outside of the country and wanting to get in. There's a level of frustration there as well in terms of, getting online and the platform, and they can't receive responses and so on and so forth. All of those sort of logistical things, I'm sure will be worked out and moving forward with. So you can't. I am one, and let me say publicly, right here on this program, the First of All program, facts. We cannot keep the country closed forever. However, to open up the country, it must be done methodically and strategically, because taking into consideration what our survival is in terms of government and the risk that it would pose. So it's not an easy decision for them to make. I'm sure that they are weighing all of those options and so on and so forth. And just to say to the listening and viewing public, don't expect us to come in here and be bashing the government all the time, because at the end of the day, we who are members of the previous administration, we understand the type of decisions that they will have to make. And you cannot please everybody at all time. But we will be open and honest, and we'll just give you the facts. But when they are in tune and online, we will support them, like we do in the House of Assembly. As a matter of fact, one lady asked me, y'all seem to be supporting everything, the government, and I said, hey, if they're doing anything that is worth our support, we will do that. Yes. But I want to say something, Cora, while you're there, and to the general public. There's a lot of topics that we have to cover. Yeah. And we are going to basically, put each hour, each program, sort of topical. We have to talk about quite a bit about the labor issues of the day. Yeah. As I mentioned before, we're going to take a whole hour with health, so to speak. Coming forward. The education projects we got to talk about. Yes. We got to talk about the Sandy Ground Marina. We got to talk about, and with your legal background, a lot of stuff that you can flush out for the public, so to speak. We got to talk about our experiences with the various permanent secretaries and the people, the heads of department that we work with, how we think they can be utilized much more effectively and efficiently and so on. Of course, when you talk about education, you're going to talk about Albina Lake High Comprehensive School. Yes. You're going to talk about sports. We're going to talk about community college. Yes. You're going to talk about Anguilla development. But there are so many topics that we need to talk about.
The unfortunate thing, fortunate or unfortunate, they say that you and I are the two most talkative of the group. And so, I'm looking at the time, right, and it's almost 1/2 already, and we just haven't even gotten into the meat as yet, because we're just talking about the general concepts and how it feels being elected, being in there. And I think that was one of the reasons why our campaign was, as they call it, was not as sexy as the other campaign, and that's because we were in there and we understood the difficulties and that the next government will have to take up and go on. So we couldn't go on the platform knowing the situation having expressed the situation to the public and still tell lies or untruths or mistruths. We had to go out there and be responsible because we were elected, and so we knew. So we couldn't go in and make promises and say, "Oh, we're going to do this and we're going to do that and we're going to, drop taxes and we're going to do all these other things."
And like the budgetary support, the
Yes,
$100 million,
the $100
and stuff like
million,
that,
you know,
which
how,
we knew.
and that was expressed, that was discussed, you know, it was told to the general public the reason why it had to be signed for budgetary support, etc. But it was turned into a political football. And then after elections, the same political football had to be picked up and carried and agreed to.
And that was just an example.
Right.
Of course, the goods and services taxes.
The
so on and
GS, that's
so forth.
another one.
Another
We're
one
now,
that
yeah,
will
we're
have
now
to be
hearing
flushed out.
that it's going to move forward because, you know, despite what is said during the campaign, it's a whole different situation when you're in there dealing with it.
We will have to discuss it here on this as
of
well,
course,
and
definitely.
so on. But in terms of going forward, like I said, we will have to talk about in these various programs about our relationship.
Yes.
You know, you would have.
Well, I only had two. Yes, Christina Scott. Yes, and
Tim.
now
Tim.
Florence.
I would have had probably about 7 or 8.
Yeah.
You know, and so on. It's
Right.
so long,
Yeah.
you know. But the point I'm making, all of those sort of things, those topics that we gotta talk about. But before, and it's almost, you know, half the time already, we have to take some time to talk about the labor code and what is happening, because remember now we just spoke about opening, so to speak, and the opening that we are talking about is opening up the country for our guests. You know, there's no secret that that tourism generates the type of revenue in terms of the budgetary the revenue from the budgetary side, and that is our lifeline, so to speak, our bloodline, so to speak, moving forward. And you, being the former Minister of Labor, of course, Home Affairs and Immigration and so on, because we got to get to immigration too.
Yes.
But labor now, and we open up the country, the folks that that have been most adversely affected by the close down and the country closing are those folks in the hospitality industry, and then the ripple effect from that. So I know that you did a lot of work while you were minister responsible for labor and immigration, you and your permanent secretaries and you in the entire department, in terms of the labor code. Now I remember quite well when there was a demonstration against the physical planning bill and the labor code. I am not sure that as much emphasis was placed on the labor code at that particular point in time.
That was
but
2009, right?
2007, 8.
Yeah.
He wasn't in
I was there. I was part of the crowd. I wasn't making any trouble, but I was just there, and I was shocked. I'll be honest with you.
I was a minister of government at the
Oh,
time.
people were so angry. I'm sitting in the crowd,
and I'm
like,
sure,
"Woo!"
and I'm sure that they were not angry really about the labor code, so to speak, but the physical planning bill really had the traction. But it was all caught up.
Yeah, there was no discussion about the labor code.
Yeah, it was all
never
caught up.
got further than the planning bill. That's where it started, and that's where it died.
So, you know, we attempted then. There was another administration, the AUM administration, and then terms of labor, you know. But when you got elected to office and became the minister responsible for labor, you took it upon yourself, not only with the labor issues and the labor code, but also with the electoral and constitutional. But that's another topic in itself. But let us talk about labor and you know, the labor law and certain changes that were made and where we are with respect to that.
I'll tell you now that the labor ministry, to me, is one of the most difficult ministries to deal with, and that's because you have practically, if you're not an employer, you're an employee. And so practically every dispute, issue, etc. comes or is filtered in through the labor ministry, the labor department. And so when I took up that portfolio, there were a number of issues. And as a practicing lawyer, I would have dealt with the Fair Labor Standards Act. I would have known that it was imprecise, it was vague, that there were certain areas. And a lot of it came down to practice because there was no law there to govern how the extent of the relationships between employer and employee. And over the years, you have seen, I think, the average person will have seen that labor relations have changed over the years. So it moved from more of a trust sort of concept to more where there were a lot of difficulties in terms of what the employers wanted and whether or not governments were in approval of what of those things. And there's always a struggle because remember, businesses investment comes into Anguilla because people do it to make money. It's not often that you build a business not to make money off of it. And so you come in and you want to make money off of this investment you put down in Anguilla, and you hire employees because you need the employees to be able to make your business work. But at the same time, the employees want to have a job, but they want to have a job where, in the ideal cases, the fair days work, fair days pay, good treatment, etc. And so when you have tensions that take place, then that creates a difficulty. So when I took up the labor ministry in April of 2015, by that time, short-term contracts had already been in place. Mm-hmm. And when I say short-term contracts, there was one particular hotel that had placed people on 3-month contracts, 6-month contracts at the time.
So that was in place prior to?
That was in place.
Okay.
You hear the other persons trying to recharacterize it, but the reality is that short-term contracts, not 1-year contracts, shorter than 1-year contracts, were actually existing and being used with employees before April of 2015.
Just the facts.
Yeah, just the facts. And so when I first got elected, I met with those entities, etc., and we expressed, and I believe all of us as the entire cabinet met with those persons and expressed our desire to have our Anguillians not on short-term contracts, etc. And so it was a vexing situation because before that, if you work at the hotels, you work from October, November until about March, April or so. And then you go home. But there's never a discussion as to whether or not you're coming back, because it was always assumed that when the season reopened, you were going back to work. And so it was, and that's what I mean by an informal way of operating, because you weren't technically permanent, but you were under the law, but you were seen as permanent. So unless you did something to require you to be terminated, you were essentially coming back, And so that changed. And when that changed, what it meant was that you're on short-term contract. At the end of that contract, you may go home, you may not go home, and you had no ability to become a permanent employee long-term. And so what that means is that what that meant was when you go to the bank, you can't take a loan because they're looking at your contract, whether it's a 3-month, 6-month, 1 year, and they're saying, well, look, you're only temporarily employed, you're only employed for a certain period of time. There's no guarantee you're going to have a job after that, so we can't give you a loan. And so, of course, most of us go to the bank for loans for our vehicles, house, send our children off to university, even small loans, because sometimes we need to buy a new kitchen set, etc., and you may not have the cash on hand, but if you have a job, you know that you can pay it over in installments. And so all of those things were thrown up in the air, and it meant that you had no stability of a job moving forward. And so that's one of the first issues that I had identified.
And I remember that quite vividly, because in our discussions, just what you mentioned in terms of folks in the hospitality industry, they were able to secure loans from the bank because it was an expectation that they would go back to work, even though it was sort of seasonal. Right?
Exactly.
I mean, I would have mentioned in one of those meetings that I have direct family members, two of my sisters basically, worked in the hospitality industry for 33 years, would have gotten loans, sent her children to school and did other things and so on and so forth. Each of my sisters, another one, 25 years in the hospitality industry, would have sent their kids to school and do a number of other things and so on and so forth. So, and all of that was under the same Fair Labor Standards
Act, the original law.
The original law. And but it was it was perceived that, hey, April, May, or whenever, you go home and get yourself organized, or the season would slow down.
Yes.
Because I remembered it used to be at the end of August. They would shut down, and whether for refurbishing, painting,
Yes,
and
exactly.
everything else, and then open
Right.
again
And
for the
then
season.
Yes.
Those are some of the things
Right.
that and with this new, well, I shouldn't say new. Someone would have, for some unknown reason or for known reasons, would have looked at the labor standard, the fair labor standards, and they would have implemented the less than 1 year
Yes.
using the law at the time.
Yes, because the law was vague. It did not
Right.
cater to short term. Well, it actually the law does. The original Fair Labor Standards Act didn't even say anything about being permanent. So it was just
Okay.
implied, but it was
Right.
never in the law.
Okay.
So after we had those discussions and we decided that, look, we need to actually put legislation in place,
Right.
because the employment arena in Anguilla has changed and has evolved over the years. And so whereas before there was sort of like a trust basis, you kind of had to do something a little bit more concrete to be able for people to understand what their rights and obligations were. So that's how we had to move forward with amending the labor laws.
Right.
And so but there was amendments, drafts from even your
Yes,
time,
yes.
from between 2005 2010.
Yeah.
There was a consultant that came into Anguilla.
Yes, sir.
That was put on the side, as you said,
Yes.
with the whole planning bill, etc. That was shelved. Between 2010 and 2015, when the AUM was in, they brought in another consultant and prepared another draft, and that was put on the shelf as well. And so when I came, I said, you know what? If we don't make a stand and do something for the people, we will never get this law in place. And so, we had to make the tough decision to put measures in place that will provide greater protection. Now, some people say, okay, well, that was only for one sector, but not all sectors had the same thing. But there was nothing preventing the same 1-year contract being applied throughout the
Okay.
entire private sector. In fact, I know of certain restaurants that have already started implementing, putting people on 1-year contracts following the same trend. And so it's not something, imagine a whole workforce in private sector being on 1-year contracts. I mean, how could an economy survive with having everybody on 1-year contracts? And we couldn't wait until that happened to realize that we had a problem. We had to deal with it from upfront. And so that's why I decided that it was something that we had to champion, we had to take forward. And we did a lot of work with the labor law. It took quite a while. There was a draft when we came, we took it out to consultation. There were a lot of changes. In fact, the Labor Relations Act as it exists today does not look very much like what was there when we picked up the draft labor code back in 2015. So there have been a lot of amendments, and certainly the 1-year contract with short-term contracts was nowhere part of the original draft that came to us, that we inherited when we took office in April 2015. So fast forward, we went through a lot of discussion, consultations, meetings. We did not get as much traction as when we took it to the House for the first reading.
Right.
in February of 2017.
Like everything else in Anguilla in terms of legislation,
Yes.
You take it out for public consultation, and the interest is not there.
Right.
Because I can give you an example. When we were doing the constitutional and electoral
Yes.
reform, at that time, 7 elected members. It was Kenneth Harrigan Osborne, myself, Victor. It was Edison Beard, Hubert Hughes, and Alberto. We went throughout the country.
All seven.
All 7 of us
Wow,
were there.
that's
I
impressive.
remember Dame Bernice Lake
Yes.
at the Ronald Webster Park when
Yes.
there was a thing making presentations and so on.
Yes.
And when you look at the turnout,
Yeah.
I believe it was Road School. We probably had about 10 people, and,
Yes.
police
Yeah.
and everybody was involved. Stony
Right.
Brown School had 2 or 3, and so
Right.
we went all around. But the minute you take it to the House,
Yes.
it piques
Yes,
interest,
people perk
and
up.
then it depends on
Yeah.
who was on the other side of the aisle
Right.
to take it
Yeah.
further and make
Yeah.
things out of
Yeah.
it. But I want to just touch back on going forward with respect to where the labor legislation is now, because
Yes.
a lot of folks, and before I say that, let me say here, because this is just the facts, that there was a lot of pushback from some of the owners and proprietors in the
Yes.
hospitality industry when you
Right.
we start to make changes and amendments
Yeah.
to what was going
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
And of course, they're going to hire lawyers and everything else and
Right,
so on
right,
and so
right,
forth.
right.
So, but
Well,
I want to I want you to speak a little bit about that and then to talk about where we are now.
yes.
What is in there to assist us?
Right. I think the challenge was people were concerned that the changes that we were putting into the law would have created financial stress. And remember, this is coming out of Hurricane Irma Hurricane Irma was September 2017. We took it to the House February 2018, although we had been doing consultations from 2015. And so a lot of the feedback that we were getting was that it's going to increase the financial cost and a lot of things. But the law has been in place today now since January of 2019, and the greatest changes that we made would have been in terms of the severance pay, so that if you are let go after you made permanent, etc., then you have to be paid compensated for the amount of years that you were working, and so it's on a scale that's set out in the labor law. And we increased the holidays from 12 days to 15 days per person. And so those were the two most significant. We had the draft legislation did have something about insurance and pension. But at the time, we simply could not see how we could implement that and impose that on the business community, because we're coming out of a hurricane. We do not have that structure in place. And so we decide that we have to take it in stages. Like everything, you just can't, a lot of times you just can't jump right in and demand all. You have to be able to get to a stage where you can say, look, the economy has improved, it's doing better, etc. The world has moved forward, and we need to put mandatory insurance. We need to put mandatory pension plans in place, etc. But for now, what we wanted was severance that had been implemented in other jurisdictions and had not been in Anguilla. So those are the kind of things that we focused on in this go round for the Labor Relations Act, and so we did. And so a lot of the employers were angry, and in fact, some of them had been my clients while I was practicing law. And so yes, so you can imagine having to come up and deal with that and saying, look, notwithstanding what would be good for my own personal interest, let's put that to the side. I'm elected by the people of Anguilla, and my job as being an elected representative and Minister of Labor is to do what's right for the country as a whole and not just for individual persons. And so I had to put that to the side and deal with the concerns and the issues that we saw was affecting our Anguillan employees every day. And I want to say that the law is not tilted pro-employee, as some people were claiming to be, because there's a balancing act in it. I mean, if you don't work, then there's no reason why the law should protect you.
Yeah, I want you to say that again.
For remaining employed, not doing what you're supposed to do.
So,
you have to work. You have to put in a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. It is only that law applies when you are putting in a fair day's work and a fair day's pay, and you're doing what you're supposed to do. Then in those circumstances, the law says you are a good employee for all intents and purposes, and we have to protect you from being mistreated, etc. And so that's where it came in. But if you're not doing the things you're supposed to do, the employer does have a right to terminate you.
Okay. Yeah.
Does
Fair.
have a right. And
fair.
so and it's not a complicated process. It just requires that the employer continues to make notes, keep a record in terms of the failures of the employee. And so it's not something you just jump up and say you're fired like that. It doesn't work like that, unless the circumstances are so bad that yes, you do have to be fired immediately.
I don't want to disturb your trend of thought there, but in terms of you mentioned about the employer's responsibility in keeping a record on the employee per se.
Yes.
That seemed to be a systematic problem that we have here, even in the civil service.
Even in my own office. I won't lie. It's difficult. You don't want to say anything bad. You don't want to write up people. You just you want to forgive and continue to give people chances, and then you reach a point where you hit a wall and you say, okay, you know what, I can't go anymore. The problem is that you weren't making a record all along.
Exactly.
You know.
So I think that is something that from every level of society, employment, employee, you have to have some sort of record, whether I'm a good employee, whether I'm tidy, whether I'm and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
How would without that record, so to speak, how would an employer be able to justify letting go an employee based on
see, and that's where the difficulty comes in, because
if no record is kept,
if no record is kept, it's very difficult unless there is something like, for instance, if you stole an employee stole from you, right? That is grounds for immediate termination, right? As long as I can prove that it is that person that stole from me, etc. If there are certain other things that you have a manual or a policy, and if you go against the policy, it could be grounds for immediate termination because it's in the policy. But because most persons don't keep a record, is, I suspect, the reason why these one-year contracts and short-term contracts came into being. So as opposed to the employer doing what they have to do, they place they place people on one-year contracts that at the end of the contract they say, okay, well, you know what, let's just not renew that person, to make it easy for them so that they don't have to continue to keep a record. They just wait until the contract comes to an end. But that's not the obligation, that's not the role. Your role is to keep a record of your employee. If the employee has been doing well, you keep a record. If the employee has not been doing well, you keep a record. You cannot short circuit and put persons on short-term one-year contracts for the sake of not having to keep good records. Right? So, but today, I just want to go forward to answer your question. Where we are today, we were able to pass the Labor Relations Act. We were able to provide protection to say that after you have been employed for 1 year or for a term, like so for instance the hotel sector is not 1 year, but they are seasonal, and the labor law provides that as well. If you've been working for a season, you are re-employed for the next season. When you become re-employed is when you become a permanent employee. And if you think about it, the hotel sector, the employees, this is the second time in 3 years that they've been sent home. Many of them been terminated from their jobs. The second time. What does that say in terms of you as a person being able to maintain your family? What does that say in terms of being able to have any kind of decent livelihood? Now, the two circumstances were acts of God, outside the control of the employers, hurricane and COVID. By the end of the day, it shows you how precarious your position is as a hotel worker. And so when we passed the law, we wanted to make sure that persons became permanent after the second go round. Right. And with the terminations of some of the persons in the hotel sector that were on one-year contracts, the issue of the labor law has come full circle. So when we put the law in place, we put it to address those circumstances where year after year you're going back on one-year contracts. It was drafted in the Attorney General's chambers. It was consulted on, my permanent secretary, the labor commissioner, all of us weighed in and took these things to consultation, took it back to the Attorney General's chambers. It was a long time, a lot of work that was done to be able to get the law where it was. So when the terminations took place and the issue first arose, Labor Commissioner would have written to the hotel entity and would have said, the law says that these persons were one-year contract because the law kicked in January of 2019. Right. So they are now permanent employees. There was pushback. The response coming from the lawyers for the entity was no. We don't interpret that to be the case. So the law doesn't kick in until the year after. So which means they're still on one-year contracts. Elections takes place, actually terminations came after elections. So I have that backward. They were terminated before elections, they were put on new contracts. So they were sent. The one-year contracts have come to an end. My brain is a little fuzzy right now, but the one-year contracts came to an end. The issue came up, and we argued. That was last year, actually, in 2019, October 2019. We argued that the law was there and these people were considered to be permanent, so they should not be on another 1-year contract. And our instructions to the Attorney General's chambers was, look, let's test the law. Take it to court. Because if we have a view, you have advised us that the law is good and it is sufficient to do what it's supposed to do to protect our employees. And the hotel is saying, no, it is not sufficient. The only way to come to a conclusion is for the court to deal with it.
Yes.
Take it to the court. And once the judge makes a decision, yes, you can appeal, and you can appeal to a Privy Council, but ultimately there's a final decision. And if it comes down that the law is good and it applies, then it means that all those persons are permanent employees.
And election has consequences.
Yeah. So elections came, and the COVID situation, all contracts were terminated. And what is disappointing, and I haven't said anything during the past 100 days because I've been trying to allow the government to do its job, but it really, really bothers me that instead of challenging the position that our people are on 1-year contracts, the position of this government has been that the law is not good law. And instead of taking forward the legislation as it exists on the books, they intend to go back to the House of Assembly and change the law. To me, I find that that's a very weak position, because if you have a law that's there, why aren't you testing it? Why have you, and is the law drafted by the same people that you want to revise the law? So why have you not taken it to court? And so to me, if I had been re-elected and be placed back in that position, I would have tested it. Because you simply can't take a position that a law is not valid when it's on the books and it's applicable and where it would protect the people. So when you take a position saying that the law is not good law, you've left the employees out in the cold. You've given them no option.
And we have to protect them as well.
Yeah.
There are so many things that I wanted to have further discussed with you concerning the labor law and so on and so forth. But you did mention that test the law if it's there.
Test it.
Because remember, the government is they are the majority.
Right.
We all are legislators. Yes, we can bring it to the House, but at the end of the day, the ayes have it, and the majority all the ayes, so to speak.
Because in the same way, Neil, they can, whatever new law they change in the House, the people can come back and say, oh, that's not good law. We're ignoring that as well. What are you going to do then? You're going to take another, go back and do a new law and take it back to the House? It's just like a cycle that they're jumping on, so that is not going to be helpful for the people at the end of the day.
So I'm easily confused. So to put it in layman terms, the law as it exists, right? You challenge it, implement it, and let it be challenged, and then the courts will decide,
right? And so especially if you have opposing views, if you have one view saying it's not legal and another view saying it's legal, why would you decide as a government that it's not legal?
Exactly.
Why would you? Yeah. When the law to say it's legal is on the books already. So I've had calls, I can tell you, that after terminations and stuff, I received a number of calls asking for my assistance, but at the end of the day, my role when I was championing that labor law, when I pushed it through against a lot of criticism and negativity, and we did that as a government for the people of Anguilla. After being in opposition, it is now the new Minister of Labor to champion the same cause and to take it forward. It is not for me. I'm now in opposition.
Exactly.
Right? But when I was in government, those are the changes that I made to protect the people. So whoever it is now, the people have elected to put into that position now need to protect the interests of the people of Anguilla.
Elections
have consequences.
Kenville, I see you looking around at us and looking up at the clock. There's so many things. I mean, we can just go on and on, talking and various things.
I told you we're the two most chatterboxes, so that's the bad thing. We haven't even gotten anywhere. We haven't touched anything.
But before we leave, I would just like to, to say to the former premier, I'm sure that he's listening, he's out there in Cayman Islands. There's no secret that during the last campaign, we saw him around on both crutches and so on and so forth. He's out there, will be looked after, getting some orthopedic work done. We're wishing him all the best in terms of his surgery and recovery, and we are anxiously awaiting his return after some physical therapy and so on and so forth, and to put away those crutches and be back on track. So he's out there in Cayman Islands. As I said, there's no secret. And again, that is something that we're going to talk about. We'll spend a whole hour on that in terms of healthcare, in terms of the various contributions, and so on and so forth. So again, let me thank you, Kendall, for being here with us, and to thank the Honorable Leader of the Opposition for here as well. We will be here, God's willing, every Monday midday. We have a number of topics, as I mentioned earlier on, that we haven't touched on as yet. We haven't exhausted the labor relations.
And we have to come back on that.
And we have to come back on that, and so on and so forth. So you see, an hour is pretty short for two chatterbox, so to speak.
Yeah.
But the experience that we would have garnered over the years in government can only be beneficial and educational to the people of Anguilla. And that is the reason why we dubbed this program Just the Facts. Of course, we're going to ask questions. Of course, we're going to be tempting those out there who are in office. But we are here to discuss with the people our various experiences, topics, and so on and so forth going forward. Whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's social development, whether it's immigration, labor, and so on and so forth, human resources, and all of those things we are going to discuss. And as I mentioned in my opening, that this really and truly is not the regular talk shop where you hear all sorts of things and so on and so forth. We're here giving you just the facts. So thank you for assisting us, and
thank you very much for being with us during our first session. And yes, and I want to thank our listeners and viewers as well for tuning in for our first program of Just the Facts. And I think we are off to a good start. We probably need to figure out how to curtail how much we talk on the next occasion so we can get more in.
That's going to be difficult. Maybe we'll have to extend the time.
I suspect that's going to be difficult, yeah. But it's been a pleasure. And as you stated, Neil, we are here to provide our views, our insight. We've been there before. We understand the needs, the concerns, and the balancing act that has to take place. And so our job is to provide that information and to bring further information to the general public and to expose them to the other aspect of the other side that may not be known generally. And so I want to thank you as well for giving us opportunity every Monday for us to be here on this radio show. And so we'll continue. We'll see you next week. God's willing.
Yes.